Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to service. Hope you guys are enjoying some of the new lockdown rules. It's nice to kind of be released. It was a great day yesterday. Hope you guys have been enjoying it. So for those who are joining us for the first time, we've just finished our Sermon on the Mount series as we go after the theme of R.E.D, radical every day, as we go after being radically like Christ every day. And we're right in this in-between period. So next week is our big UK-wide Easter service. It's going to be great. We have an awesome guest speaker coming in from Sweden who's going to be doing it via the link. Please make sure to join in that if you're able to come. That should be great. You can just join as we normally do through the website. But now that we've finished the Sermon on the Mount, and next quarter, so the next 3 months, next quarter of the year, what we're going to be going through is Jesus' call to follow him. So any sort of calls to discipleship from Christ, that's what we're going to be following after. But I thought it would be a good time to kind of sidetrack for one Sunday sermon here and look at the story of Noah, okay? So I thought that would be nice. And there's a few reasons I wanted to do that. One was because as we're coming out of lockdown, maybe there are some things that God's trying to teach us. Maybe there's some things that we need to take to heart. And there's some parallels between the story of Noah and our world today. Likewise, in Noah's time, they were living in crazy times. Like a worldwide event happened that literally stopped them. And likewise for us, to a lesser degree, we have COVID, but it still is a worldwide event that has stopped us. And what we see in the story of Noah is these worldwide events that should cause people to maybe stop and acknowledge God or think about these things. And the story of Noah doesn't seem to really have that effect. And even in our world today, I think a lot of people are kind of chalking up the COVID success to science or things like that, rather than God guiding science and guiding people's gifts to give us solutions. And I've been really surprised. Even I've been going out sharing quite a bit since lockdown has ended, sharing my faith, trying to tell people about Christ and my faith. Been out in Butte Park a lot. And one of the things that I've noticed is that so many of the people that I talk to don't even acknowledge God, don't even think about God. I'll ask questions like, hey, do you want to come to church? They're like, no, sorry, wrong place. You're in the wrong city. I've heard things like that. And I've heard things like, I'm agnostic, I'm atheist. And I'll ask questions. I'll say, well, why? Why are you that way? And they're like, I just don't know. I just don't even think about it. Just not even on the radar. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to look at the story of Noah today. So maybe you're in that boat. Maybe you really haven't thought about God, given God a shot. Well, I hope today's sermon, today's study on this passage will at least make you pause and think. And maybe think to yourself, all right, maybe there is something to this Christianity. Maybe I should give it an honest effort. So we're going to be in Genesis 6, 9 through 22, and then we're going to jump to chapter 8. And we'll read 15 through 22. Now, keep in mind, it'll be up on the screen so you can follow along there. So Genesis 6, 9 through 22. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and who walked faithfully with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on the earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it, and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Make a roof for it, leave below the roof an opening 1 cubit high all around. Put a door in the side of the ark, and make lower, middle, and upper decks. I am going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens. Every creature that has breath of life in it, everything on earth will perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird Every kind of animal and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten, store it away as food for you and for them. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. And the rest of the story goes that the flood did came, that Noah and his ark and his family and the animals survived. It's kind of a pretty famous story. Most of us know it. And then it picks up and it ends in chapter 8. And we're going to read 15 through 20 here. It says, so they've landed, they found land again. The earth has been revealed. And they find land, and this is how the story ends. Then God said to Noah, come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so that they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number on it. So Noah came out together with his sons and his wives and his sons' wives, all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground and all the birds, everything that moves on land, came out of the ark, one kind after another. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures, as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. And it goes on to say that God gives the rainbow as this sign. That's what we see after storms and things like that. So the reason I wanted to focus on this story is, again, because of the parallels that it has. They're living in a worldwide event that caused panic and a response. And likewise, we're living in a bit of one right now with COVID. And what we see is that these events should inspire a reaction from us to seek God, to look towards Him, to figure out His will for our life. And sometimes that can be hard, though. And that can be hard, especially with the culture that we live in, because we live in a culture right now where it almost seems silly and crazy to believe in Christianity. There are so many skeptics out there, and at first glance at the Bible, I can actually understand where they're coming from. Because if you just look at the Bible at first glance and you don't actually give it a shot, you don't actually dive in and look at it, there's some stories in there which seem just bonkers. They seem nuthouse crazy, right? Or they might seem like myths or things like that, but we've kind of aged out of those things, and now we actually have logical stories and history and reasonings for things. And at first glance, this story also seems crazy. This whole idea of the earth totally being flooded, that only a few people survived, and that they built this giant boat, and then somehow all these animals got on and it preserved the earth. And at first it looks crazy. It looks like a crazy story. And it's hard to believe Christianity when we live in this culture of everyone kind of reinforcing this view that it's only Christianity, or it's only science, or you're stupid if you believe in these things. And there's all this evidence and there's all these arguments that we're constantly getting fed to discredit this, to not believe this. But we have to actually take a step back and look at it and say, hey, but are we actually looking at the other side? Are we actually seeing the other side? Are we actually seeing why people devote their lives to this? Are we actually seeing why so many people gave their lives for this book, for this religion, for this belief, for this philosophy that honestly, like most of the Western world is built on? This idea of Jesus, Christian values. What is that all about? Keep in mind, no one does that perfectly, by the way, okay? There's a good quote that says, you should never judge a philosophy by its abuse. And Christianity has definitely been abused by people and given it a bad name, but we actually got to look at really what's the arguments for Christianity here. Is it just a stories and stories of crazy stories that are unbelievable? No, it's not. And for us, we gotta realize a few things about the Bible, about Christianity, about Jesus. Okay, so one of the first things that we gotta realize is that it's important to see that the Bible is not a science textbook. Okay, so it's not written with those purposes. It's not written in that literary form. And that's not the purpose behind it, especially in Genesis, as we read about, especially with the creation and things like that. Especially in Genesis 1 through 5. That's all Hebrew poetry. So much of it is meant to just communicate God's character and God's will and who God is to humanity. It's not supposed to necessarily go through exactly was the world created in exactly 7 days. That's not how it's supposed to be read. It's supposed to be read with this idea of communicating God's character to humanity. And sometimes it's hard, especially in Genesis and different parts of the Bible, because it goes from figurative to literal in different sections. So up till Noah, it has been a lot of figurative language, but then we jump into the account of Noah, and that jumps into numbers and measurements, and then it gets a little bit more literal and a little bit more binary at that point. So that's one thing that we have to see, and we have to ask ourselves the question, okay, well, if the Bible is true and it's not just a bunch of crazy stories, then why should I believe this crazy story? And that's some of the things that I want to talk about with you guys today, why I believe it and why I think the story of Noah has a great message for us and our culture, whether you believe it or not today, and I hope you guys will give it a chance here. So the first reason, I'm going to give you guys a few reasons why I believe the story of Noah and I believe the Bible. So the first one for the story of Noah is Noah is classified as a deluge myth. And a deluge is just a fancy name for a flood. So it's classified as a flood myth. So many people think like this event didn't happen. This is so crazy. What's going on here? And there's three key elements that need to be present in order for it to be classified as a deluge myth. And it's one of many. It's not the only account of this story. So the three are that there is a flood early on in human history, and it's tied to a deity, so a god, some sort of god, for retribution against mankind. It's tied to creation, so somehow our story as humanity, we ended up through that. And then the third aspect is that there's a hero of the story who survives in a vessel. So those are the three aspects of a deluge myth. And it's important to realize that Noah is not the only story of it. There's over 150 versions of this story. There's over 150 versions of deluge myths from different countries, from different cultures, from different peoples, all over the world, okay? Not just one part of the world, but all over the world. Even here, there is a Welsh deluge myth of a mastless ship that landed in Britain with two of every kind of animal, and then that, it repopulated the earth from there. So the Brits are really Welsh. So we got to keep that in mind. Amen. There's others. We got East Africa. We have one of two of every creature that came from there, and the hero there saves his family through boarding a vessel and saving the animals. We have China. There's a deluge myth from China where Zhuang survived in an upside down umbrella as the earth was flooded from an evil thunder god. There's one of India, of Kamar, who survives in a hollowed out log with two of every animal to then repopulate the earth. So what's the big deal? Well, what's the big deal if these different countries came up with their own versions of the Noah story? What we got to realize is that their source material wasn't the Noah story. Their source material was from an actual event that happened. And we know this because there's deluge myths in isolated places where people didn't have contact with each other. So one, for example, is North America. So North America, when the first European settlers arrived in North America, in Canada, we hear the story of the Native Americans there who build a great raft to save all the animals before a great monster floods the earth. We have stories of New Zealand, which is a tiny island that didn't have contact with the rest of the world for a long time, of Tua and Rati and their sisters that escape in a giant raft. We have stories of Fiji. I've been to Fiji. It's far off the coast of Australia. It's really hard to get. It's a small isolated island. But we have theirs of Dengue, who floods the earth and the people escape by building canoes. So why am I telling you guys this story is because all these different people, they didn't have contact with each other. They're isolated all over the world, but yet they still have the same story. And there's no other story that has made it worldwide the way that the story of Noah, the way that the deluge myth has made it worldwide. And the reason that we have to acknowledge this is because we have to see, whether you believe in the Bible or you don't, that this event happened for all of humanity at one point. Whether all of humanity was gathered up and they were all flooded and then they spread out from there, or whether we were all around the world and then it flooded. But at some point, all of humanity experienced a flood. Our ancestors that passed it down from generation to generation, these different deluge myths. Okay, so this is an important thing to remember, is that this story is a historical accurate thing, that there's evidence to back up that claim, that this isn't just some random happenstance, that the Bible does have some evidence and some validity behind it. All right, so the flood happened, but what about the ark? Surely the ark isn't realistic. No, and there's three things that we got to answer. One, is it realistic? Two, could it really fit all those animals? And three, would it even float? Okay, so we have to give it some tests there. So would it even float? The answer is yes. So when they've actually studied out the ark, they found that those dimensions that are mentioned in the Bible there are the same dimensions of most ocean-going vessels. So if you look out to sea or any of the ports, even here in Cardiff, if you go out to the port here, most of the big freight ships that come in have a very similar dimension to this, and it looks a little bit different because all the cargo is stacked up really high. But most large ocean-going vessels have these same dimensions. And what is crazy is that the Bible came up with these dimensions hundreds of years before modern science did. But it's cool to see that it could actually float. And so many times, so many people think that the Bible is so outdated, but so much of our technology advancements are actually catching up to the Bible. What else? Would it be big enough? Could it actually hold all these people? Well, if you were to actually break down the size of the ark, it's hard to visualize, but those different train cars. So many of us have seen trains. Those train cars, if you actually do the math on it, it could hold up to 522 train boxcars on there. So that's a lot of space from a lot of animals. And to take it even further, this isn't the first time this question has been asked. There's been people in Leicester who've asked the same question at the university there. And this is what they came up with. I'll read it to you. So if one could hypothetically build an ark to the specifications outlined in the Bible and actually cram 2 of every species on the boat, would it float, or would Noah have found himself in a Titanic-like scenario? That's what 4 physics graduate students at the University of Leicester wondered, as part of a special course that encourages the students to apply basic physics principles to more general questions. The team did the math and found that an ark full of animals in those dimensions could theoretically float. They recently published their research in a peer-reviewed, student-run publication, the Journal of Physics Special Topics. You don't think the Bible necessarily as a scientifically accurate source of information, so I guess we were quite surprised when we discovered it would work, said Thomas Morris, one of the students who worked on the project, in a statement. So yes, it could work. Yes, it could work. And here's the thing that really does convince me, of Christianity, the Bible, to all other sources, is that this is the most accurate, realistic picture of how anyone could have survived the flood out of any of the other stories. All the other stories, the big famous one, the big other famous deluge myth, has the main character escaping by a 1 by 1 by 1 boat. So basically a cube. And what do we know of that? Is that it would easily sink, that there's no way that it happened. So there's evidence that yes, this flood did happen, and yes, the dimensions of the Bible theoretically could work if it was put into practice. So we got to ask ourselves the question, are we actually giving this a shot? Are we looking at the Bible? And, for those who are Christians, are we doing the hard work of actually not just taking things at face value, but diving in so that we can have evidence to convince ourselves of how great this is, but also so that we actually have convincing reasons to pass on to other people? Okay, so next question. So the flood happened, the ark could have worked, great. But was God justified? And I think this is where it really comes down to, because this is a hard story to really swallow. But was God justified in what he did? I mean, he totally wipes out humanity. A lot of life is destroyed in that moment. But was he justified in this? Well, let's read again in Genesis 6, 5 through 6. It says, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled." What we see here is that humanity was going bad. It was going in a really rough direction. And to actually live in a world where people only think about evil, only think about self, only think about self-promotion all of the time, that is a hard, difficult world to live in. It's not a place that promotes human flourishing or anything like that. And I think God really did worry about the future fate of all humanity if these were the people that were going to be raising children, passing on traits and characteristics and character to the next generation, because it was going in a direction that was so opposite God in that way. And I think God was put in a position where he had to make a hard call of do I let this go on, or do I step in and protect the majority, future humanity, for the sake of a few here. An example would be, like, imagine if you had 6 kids. Okay, so I have 1 kid. We'll see as we grow our family, right? I'm not sure if we'll have 6 kids. That seems like a lot. I was the oldest of 7, so I can relate a little bit. But imagine if you have 6 kids, and let's say the oldest kid is just horrible, like really difficult, just a horrible influence on all the other kids. He or she abuses their siblings. They bring drugs into the home, substance abuse. They might sexually abuse the other siblings in the house. They use the other siblings. They're getting the other siblings addicted to drugs and to actions like that. What's the right thing to do in that situation? It's a hard thing to do, but the right thing to do in that situation would just be to the older sibling, hey, I can't have you in the house if you're going to be doing these things. I'm going to have to send you away, whether to a relative or to a center or something like that. Is that or some sort of rehab? You understand what I'm saying, though. Is that the right thing to do would to not just let this sibling wreak havoc on the rest of the family. The right thing to do would be to protect the family, and to do it in the most loving way possible, which God does. To protect that family, it requires kind of making that hard call, and that's what God did. God did it, and he did it in a good way. And it's not like God didn't give these guys chance and opportunity to change before this flood comes in. What we know is that Noah, it would have taken him years and years to make this giant vessel of the ark, him and his family. And why was that? I mean, it's not like him building this ark inland. He's like miles and miles away from an ocean. He lives in an arid environment. It's not like that wouldn't raise any questions with the community and the people around him at the time. So yeah, it took him years to build this in an arid region. I'm sure it would have been questions like, what are you doing? Like, this is crazy. Why would you be building this? And Noah, I'm sure, would answer. And he would be like, I'm building this because God has a plan. There's wickedness, and you need to join me and be on this ark. It's in a sense a giant billboard, a giant message that God's using through Noah to try to convince humanity to change and to get on the ark. But what we see is that no one listened to these warnings. But instead, they kept going their evil way. And if you keep persisting in doing evil and not submitting to God, God is eventually going to have to take action and step in. But it doesn't end there, okay? If this is the ending, I can understand kind of some of the feelings about it. But it even talks about this later on in the New Testament. So these people die, and it's hard to think, all right, they're wicked, they just kind of go to hell and eternity is over for them. But what does it say in 1 Peter 3:18? So this is after Jesus has risen. It says, "For Christ also suffered once for sin, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamations to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it, only a few, 8 in all, were saved through water." What we see is, I'm not sure exactly how this works. Maybe it happened when Jesus died for those 3 days. Maybe he went down to the afterlife and he actually preached the message of salvation to those who hadn't actually gotten a chance to hear the gospel before, because it was before in the Old Testament. But what we see is that God is continuously giving grace. And maybe that's how it works. Maybe there's something else. But what we do know is that these people still got a second chance. They got a second chance through Jesus. So in all honesty, I don't think God is a bad God for doing what he did. I mean, it seems like these people got second chance after second chance, that God did what was best for humanity at the time. And even for these people who were only wicked all the time, God still sent Jesus down to preach the message for them. So what does this mean for us? This is what we got to ask ourselves this morning. What does this mean for us? Let's jump back into 1 Peter 3. What does it say? It says, "After being made alive, he went and made proclamations to the imprisoned spirits, those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah, while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you. Not the removal of the dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience towards God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ." I think we actually got to take a second to realize that God is real. That God is real, that he is in control, and that Christianity is worth giving a shot to, if you haven't already. I remember being in that boat of, kind of not really following, because I didn't like the implications that it had on my life. But actually, once I sat down and gave Christianity a shot, like an honest shot, it totally changed my worldview, totally changed my outlook. And I'm so grateful that I did that. And we got to see God's character, that he is a God of judgment. Yeah, that's true. And he's also a God of grace. And those two things go perfectly hand in hand. That he is a perfect God, an awesome God, one that's not just going to let the world just go totally unruly, but he's also a God that's not going to just have rules without relationship. That he really does bring in that grace, and he wants that relationship with each and every one of us. If you are a Christian this morning, don't take that lightly. Let's not be so comfortable with our God that we forget that he's the same God that did this. I think it's so easy to kind of say, "Oh, I just fell short again. Oh, I just did this," and take that grace for granted, not realizing that this grace is supposed to motivate us towards repentance and good deeds and being sanctified and following him to the best of our ability. But don't take that lightly and really, follow him. Think through this week, in what ways have I taken this grace lightly? In what ways have I taken my God lightly, rather than really following him to the best of our ability? And the last thing that we need to see is that Jesus is the new ark, the new way to be saved, not from water, but rather our sin and our eternal destiny. The way towards that is through Jesus. He's the way to do that. That he's the new ark. And likewise for all of us, let us not close our ears to his message. For them, they had a giant ark put up and Noah as the messenger. But for us, we have Jesus, and we have Jesus' words, okay? So for all of us, let us not close our ears to that. Let us not take for granted just the awesome impact, just spending a little bit a day, a few minutes a day. What a few minutes of reading God's word and putting it into practice every day. Let's remember that that can have a huge impact on our life. And for all of us, whether you're a skeptic, whether you're a Christian, somewhere in between, let us all really invest in this. Let us remember who God is, that he's a God who created us. He's a God of judgment. He's a God of grace. That he's a God who calls us to follow him because he loves us. He wants a relationship with each and every one of us. Let's remember that the Bible is something that's sound, that is something great. If you haven't researched the Bible or some of the stories in it, please go away and do so. I beg you. Our culture isn't something that's going to do that for you. You have to be purposeful about that. But if it's true, it has deep implications for our lives. So please do that. And let's remember the awesome story of Noah. Thanks so much, guys. Bye.